I thought I knew who I was. 62 years old, married for 35 years, 2 grown children, 4 grandchildren, and enough money to retire comfortably. I'd spent 40 years building a career in aerospace defense contracting, working my way up from an engineer fresh out of the Air Force to director of operations at Vertex Defense Systems in Denver. My wife Patricia and I had a beautiful home in Cherry Hills Village worth $3.8 million. We had plans. Europe next summer. More time with the grandkids. Maybe buy that cabin in Wyoming we'd always talked about. 3 months ago, Patricia filed for divorce. Not just any divorce. She claimed I'd been embezzling from the company for years, hiding money in offshore accounts, and that I'd become emotionally abusive and controlling. She produced bank statements I'd never seen, emails I'd never written, and testimony from a therapist I'd never met. Her lawyer painted me as a paranoid former military man who'd been secretly draining our retirement accounts and gaslighting her for decades. The worst part? My own children believed her. My son Derek, 32, a commercial pilot, stopped returning my calls. My daughter Michelle, 30, a pediatrician, actually testified against me. She told the court that I'd always been distant, controlling, that she'd been afraid of me growing up. None of it was true, but sitting in that courtroom watching my daughter say those words with tears streaming down her face, I realized I'd already lost before the gavel ever fell. The judge ruled in Patricia's favor on almost everything. The house went to her. My retirement accounts, split but with penalties that left me with far less than I'd earned. My pension from Vertex, divided. The savings account we'd built for the grandchildren's college funds, now under her control. Worse, the company put me on immediate administrative leave pending an internal investigation into the embezzlement claims. 40 years of spotless service, and suddenly I was a suspect. I remember standing outside the courthouse in downtown Denver, October wind cutting through my jacket, watching Patricia walk away with her lawyer. She didn't look back, didn't even glance my direction. My attorney, who I'd paid $30,000 just to watch me lose, patted my shoulder and said something about appeals that I didn't hear because I was staring at Michelle getting into Patricia's car. My little girl, the one I'd taught to ride a bike, walked down the aisle at her wedding, held in the hospital when her first child was born. She wouldn't even look at me. I had $1,100 in my checking account, a 15-year-old Toyota Camry, and nowhere to go. My brother offered his spare room in Colorado Springs, but I couldn't face that. Couldn't face anyone who knew me, who'd look at me with either pity or suspicion. So I drove. I drove east out of Denver with no particular destination in mind, just away. Away from the house that wasn't mine anymore. Away from the office where security had boxed up my personal items. Away from my children who thought I was a monster. I drove through Kansas, where the plains stretched endless and empty like my future. Through Missouri, where I stopped at a truck stop and bought coffee, and realized I was heading toward Kentucky, toward my father's place. My father, James Barrett Sr., had died 7 months earlier at the age of 88. He'd been living alone on 20 acres in rural Kentucky, about 40 miles south of Lexington, in a place so remote that GPS couldn't find it. I'd been there for the funeral, a small affair with maybe a dozen people, most of them fellow veterans from his American Legion post. My father had been a Vietnam veteran, Army Special Forces, the kind of man who never talked about what he'd done over there but who woke up screaming sometimes even into his 80s. We'd never been close. He'd been a hard man, emotionally distant, the kind of father who showed love through providing rather than affection. After my mother died when I was 16, he'd become even more withdrawn, though he made sure I got through school, made sure I could go to college, made sure I had what I needed to make something of myself. When I joined the Air Force, he nodded once and said, "Good, you'll learn discipline." The property had been sitting empty since his death. My sister Karen, who lived in Lexington and worked as a prosecutor in the district attorney's office, had been handling the estate paperwork, but we hadn't decided what to do with the land yet. It wasn't worth much. The house was old, built in the 1962, but the 20 acres were beautiful in that quiet, forgotten way that eastern Kentucky can be. I pulled up the long gravel driveway just after sunset 3 days after the court ruling. The house looked exactly as I remembered it from the funeral, weathered gray siding, covered front porch, surrounded by oak and maple trees that were dropping their November leaves. I sat in the car for a long time, engine off, watching darkness settle over the property. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Mom says you're harassing her. Stop trying to contact us. We need space." I hadn't contacted anyone in 3 days. I turned off my phone and went inside. The house smelled like old wood and dust. My father had lived simply, almost Spartanly. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances from the 1982nd, a living room with a wood stove and exactly 1 piece of furniture, his recliner positioned to face the window overlooking the back acreage. The walls were bare except for 1 framed photograph of my mother and his discharge papers from the army. I spent that first week in a fog. I slept in my father's recliner because I couldn't bring myself to use his bedroom. I ate canned soup from his pantry that was probably years old. I stared out at the trees and tried to understand how my entire life had collapsed in less than 3 months. Karen called on the 5th day. She was the only person I'd told where I was. "Jim, you sound terrible," she said. "Come stay with me and Thomas. You shouldn't be alone out there." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You lost everything." "I didn't lose everything," I said, though even I didn't believe it. "I have this place. That old house. Jim, it's falling apart. There's no heat except that wood stove. The roof probably leaks, and you're 40 miles from anywhere. This isn't the time to play hermit. Karen, do me a favor. Use your prosecutor connections. Look into Patricia's lawyer. Look into those bank statements they produced. Something isn't right." She was quiet for a moment. "Jim," I looked at the court documents. The evidence was pretty damning. It's fabricated, all of it. I never opened any offshore accounts, never wrote those emails. Someone created all of that, and I need to know who and why. If it was fabricated, your lawyer should have challenged it. He did, or he said he did. I don't know. Maybe he was incompetent. Maybe he was in on it. I don't know anything anymore except that I didn't do what they're accusing me of. Karen sighed. "Okay, I'll make some calls, see what I can find out. But Jim, even if something's wrong, proving it is going to be hard. The judge already ruled. Just look into it. Please." After we hung up, I walked through the house more carefully than I had in days. I needed to stay busy, needed something to do besides sit and spiral. I'd start cleaning the place out, maybe fix it up enough to sell it, give me some money to live on while I figured out what came next. I started in the bedroom. My father's clothes still hung in the closet, his combat boots lined up precisely on the floor. I boxed everything up for donation. In the dresser, I found his medals in a shoebox, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, along with some old letters from my mother, written during his deployment. I set those aside to keep. The kitchen was next, throwing out expired food, cleaning out cabinets that hadn't been touched in years. Then the bathroom, the living room. By the end of the 2nd week, the house was almost empty, stripped down to its bones. I'd gotten the wood stove working, was sleeping in a sleeping bag on the floor, had started splitting wood from the property to keep warm as November turned colder. It was while moving my father's recliner to clean behind it that I noticed the floor. The floorboards didn't sit quite right. One section, about 3 feet square, had a slight gap around the edges that the others didn't. I knelt down and ran my hand along it, felt how it was separate from the surrounding floor. When I pried at it with a screwdriver, the entire section lifted up as one piece. Underneath was a metal box, about the size of a small safe, set into the foundation. My heart was pounding as I pulled it out. It was heavy, locked with a combination dial. There was no rust, no dust on it. This had been accessed recently, probably right before my father died. I tried his birthday, my mother's birthday. Nothing worked. Then I remembered something. When I'd gone through his dresser, there'd been a small notebook in with the medals, the kind veterans sometimes use for appointments. I retrieved it, flipped through pages of my father's shaky handwriting, mostly notes about medical appointments and phone numbers for the VA. On the last page with writing, there was a string of numbers, 142765, the 27th of February 1965. The day he'd met my mother, according to family stories. The combination worked. Inside the box was money. A lot of money. Bundles of $100 bills wrapped in paper bands marked with amounts. I counted it twice, hands shaking. $87,000 in cash. But that wasn't all. Underneath the money was a cell phone, an old model from maybe 10 years ago, and a legal envelope with my name written on it in my father's handwriting. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address in Denver, Patricia's sister's address, and a name I didn't recognize, Marcus Webb. Below that, a note in my father's shaky script. Jim, if you're reading this, something went wrong. Listen to everything on the phone. Everything. Trust Karen. Don't trust the lawyers. The money is clean, saved over 40 years. Use it to fight back. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. They were watching. I love you, son. I'm proud of who you became. Dad. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I turned it on. The battery was dead, but I found a universal charger in my car that fit it. While it charged, I sat on the floor with that note, reading it over and over. They were watching. Who was watching? What did Patricia's sister have to do with anything? Who was Marcus Webb? When the phone had enough charge, I opened it. There was only one app icon that wasn't standard, a voice recorder. Inside were 17 audio files, each dated, the most recent from 7 months ago, just days before my father died. I pressed play on the first one, dated 3 years ago. My father's voice, weaker than I remembered it but still firm. November 8th. Jim doesn't know I'm recording this. He doesn't know any of this. I'm doing this because I'm 85 years old and my memory isn't what it was. And if something happens to me, someone needs to know. Jim, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and you need to understand what's really happening to your life. I listened, frozen, as my father's voice continued. In 1968, I was part of a classified operation in Vietnam, 3rd Special Forces Group. We ran interdiction missions along the Cambodian border, targeting supply routes. On one mission, we stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to see. A heroin processing operation, but it wasn't run by the Viet Cong or the NVA. It was Americans. Officers. They were using military transport to move product, using classified channels to coordinate with organized crime back in the States. I took photographs, kept notes. When I reported it to my commanding officer, I was told to forget what I'd seen. When I pushed, I was threatened. When I threatened to go higher up the chain, someone tried to kill me. Made it look like enemy fire. I got lucky, survived with just the wound that earned me the Purple Heart. I stared at the phone, my father's words not quite making sense. He'd never talked about Vietnam, never said anything beyond the most basic facts. After I was discharged, I thought it was over. I moved to Kentucky, married your mother, tried to build a normal life, but they kept tabs on me. Every few years, someone would show up, make sure I remembered to keep quiet, usually subtle, a car following me. A message left at work, just enough to remind me that they knew where I was, that they knew about you and your mother. I stayed quiet. I had a family to protect. I thought if I just kept my head down, they'd leave us alone. The recording paused. I could hear my father's breathing, labored. Your mother's accident wasn't an accident, Jim. I've never said that out loud, never even let myself think it for too long, but I know. The brakes on her car failed on that mountain road. The mechanic said they'd been cut. The police wrote it off as a accident, metal fatigue. But I knew. It was a message. They wanted me to know they could reach my family anytime they wanted. You were 16. I sent you to live with your aunt that summer. Said it was because I needed time to grieve. Really, I was afraid they'd come for you next. When they didn't, when enough time passed, I convinced myself maybe I was paranoid. Maybe your mother's death really was just a terrible accident. I felt sick. I'd been standing, but I sat down hard on the floor, the phone still playing. Then you joined the Air Force, and I was terrified. Terrified you'd end up in the same world I'd been in, see things you shouldn't see. But you went into engineering, stayed stateside, got out after 8 years and went corporate. I thought you were safe. I thought they'd forgotten about me, about you. I was wrong. The first recording ended. I sat in the dark house, the only light coming from the phone screen, and pressed play on the second recording. December 20th. 3 years ago, Patricia came to visit me. Jim doesn't know this. She told him she was going to a spa weekend with her sister. She drove here instead. She asked me questions about my service record, about who I'd served with, about classified operations. She said she was researching for a book she wanted to write about Vietnam veterans. I didn't believe her. The questions were too specific, too focused on my unit, my assignments. I played dumb, told her I didn't remember much. After she left, I started paying attention. My stomach dropped. 3 years ago. Patricia had told me she went to that spa weekend. I'd believed her. The recordings continued, each one more disturbing than the last. My father detailed how he'd started following Patricia carefully, using old skills from his Special Forces days. He recorded her meeting with a man named Marcus Webb at a coffee shop in Denver. He photographed Webb, used connections from his American Legion post to identify him. Marcus Webb, 63 years old, former Army intelligence, currently worked as a private investigator with a client list that included several law firms. But Webb's real background was darker. He'd been investigated twice for evidence tampering, once for blackmail, never charged. He specialized in divorce cases, helping clients manufacture evidence against their spouses. My father's recordings detailed how he'd tracked Webb back to a law firm in Denver, the same firm that Patricia would later hire for our divorce. He documented meetings between Patricia and Webb that started 3 years ago and continued regularly. He recorded Patricia meeting with her sister Rebecca, conversations about setting things up and making sure everything was documented. By the 10th recording, my father's voice was shaking with anger. "Jim, your wife has been planning to destroy you for at least 3 years. I don't know why. I don't know if it's connected to my past, or if she has her own reasons. But she's been systematically building a case against you, creating evidence, coordinating with people who specialize in this kind of fraud. The offshore accounts, the emails, all of it is manufactured. I have proof. I've been collecting it, documenting everything. But I'm 85 years old and I don't know how much time I have. I'm hiding this because I think someone is watching my house. I've seen the same car drive past 3 times this week. I'm being careful with how I move the documentation, where I hide things." The 14th recording dated 4 months before he died. I finally found the connection. Marcus Webb worked with someone I knew in Vietnam, a lieutenant named Carl Morrison. Morrison was one of the officers involved in the heroin operation. He died 10 years ago, but he had a son, David Morrison, who now runs a consulting firm in Denver that's really a front for all kinds of corporate espionage and fraud. Patricia's law firm has used Morrison's services before. I think they're all connected to the same network that's been operating since Vietnam, evolved from drugs to legitimate-looking white-collar crime. I think Patricia somehow got connected to them, either through her sister Rebecca, who works in real estate and might have crossed paths with Morrison's people, or someone else. I'm still trying to figure out why they targeted you specifically. Maybe because of me. Maybe because you work in defense contracting and they want access to something. I don't know yet. The 16th recording, just 2 weeks before he died, I mailed copies of everything to Karen, told her it was just old paperwork for the estate, but it's in a sealed box marked for you. Jim, when you get this, Karen has the evidence. Bank records showing the offshore accounts were opened with forged signatures. Email metadata proving the messages came from IP addresses nowhere near your home or office. Photographs of Patricia meeting with Webb and Morrison. Phone records, all of it. You can reopen the case. You can prove what they did, but be careful. These people killed your mother. They might have killed me too. I've been having chest pains, but I'm afraid to go to the hospital. I think they might try something there. If I die suddenly, know that I fought to protect you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I'm sorry I wasn't a better father. I hope you can forgive me." The 17th and final recording was just 3 days before his death. My father's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm going to the hospital. Can't breathe right. Karen is picking me up. Jim, if you're hearing this, I love you. I'm so proud of you. You became everything I hoped you'd be. Better than me, kinder than me. Don't let them take that away from you. Fight back. Win. And when you do, remember that everything I did, every distance I kept, was to protect you. That's what fathers do, son. We stand in front of the bullets, so you don't have to." The recording ended. I sat in the dark for a long time, crying like I hadn't cried since I was a child. My father. My hard, distant, impossible father who I'd spent my whole life trying to please, trying to understand, trying to connect with. He'd been protecting me my entire life. He'd lost my mother protecting me. He'd kept his distance protecting me. He died protecting me. And I'd never known. I called Karen at 2 in the morning. She answered on the first ring, voice thick with sleep. "Jim, what's wrong?" "The box you have from Dad. The sealed one marked for me. Do you still have it?" Silence. Then, "How did you know about that?" "Dad left me something. A phone with recordings. He said you have evidence." "Jim." Her voice changed, became sharper, more focused. "I opened that box last week. I was going to call you, but I wanted to verify everything first, make sure I understood what I was looking at." Jim, Dad, documented everything. Patricia, the lawyer, the investigator, all of it. He has proof that the evidence used against you was fabricated. Can we reopen the case? Already working on it. I contacted a federal prosecutor I know, showed them what Dad collected. If this is as big as it looks, it's not just divorce fraud. It's wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, federal charges. I was going to call you tomorrow, but since you're up, I'm coming out there. Don't go anywhere. Don't contact anyone. I'll be there in an hour. True to her word, Karen pulled up the gravel driveway at 3:30 in the morning, a file box in her arms. We sat at my father's kitchen table with the evidence spread between us, and Karen, in her prosecutor voice, walked me through everything. Our father had been meticulous. He'd photographed Patricia meeting with Marcus Webb 17 times over 3 years. He'd documented Webb's connections to David Morrison and his consulting firm. He'd traced the shell corporations used to create the fake offshore accounts back to Morrison's network. He'd obtained phone records showing hundreds of calls between Patricia, her sister Rebecca, Webb, and Morrison. Most damning, he'd found the source of the fabricated emails. They'd been created using software designed for corporate espionage, backdated and sent through a server in Romania to make them look legitimate. But my father, who'd somehow learned basic digital forensics in his 80s, had tracked the IP addresses and access logs. Every single email had been created from a computer at Morrison's office. "The federal prosecutor wants to move on this fast," Karen said. "Once we file, they'll freeze Patricia's assets, arrest Webb and Morrison, subpoena the law firm. This is going to be big, Jim. Really big." Dad stumbled onto a whole network of people who've been running sophisticated fraud operations for decades. "What about Patricia? Why did she do this? Why target me specifically?" Karen pulled out another document. Dad's last notes. He wasn't sure, but his theory was that Morrison's people identified you as a target because of your position at Vertex Defense. They wanted access to classified information, thought they could use Patricia to get it. She might have been recruited, or maybe she was just greedy and they offered her money. Dad found evidence that she was paid $200,000 by one of Morrison's shell companies 2 years ago. I thought about my wife of 35 years, the woman I'd built a life with, raised children with, grown old with. She'd betrayed me for money and access. She'd spent years planning my destruction. "The kids," I said. "Derek and Michelle. Do they know?" Karen's face softened. "No, I don't think so. Dad's notes suggest Patricia manipulated them, probably fed them stories over years, primed them to believe the accusations. They're victims too, Jim. When the truth comes out, they'll realize what she did." Over the next 3 weeks, everything moved fast. The federal prosecutor filed charges. FBI agents arrested Marcus Webb and David Morrison in coordinated raids. Patricia was arrested at our former house, led away in handcuffs while news cameras filmed. The story made national news. Sophisticated fraud network exposed, spanning decades, targeting wealthy individuals in divorce cases. My case was reopened. The judge who'd ruled against me recused himself after it came out that he'd received campaign donations from a PAC connected to Morrison's network. A new judge reviewed the evidence, took all of 2 hours to rule that the previous judgment was based on fabricated evidence and was therefore void. I got my house back, my retirement accounts, my pension. Vertex Defense issued a public apology and offered me my job back with back pay and a promotion. But the thing I cared most about happened on a cold January morning when Derek called me. "Dad?" His voice was shaking. "I just saw the news. I saw what Mom did. I saw the evidence. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have known you'd never do those things. I'm so sorry." I was standing in my father's kitchen, looking out at the Kentucky hills covered in snow. "It's okay, son. You didn't know. She fooled all of us." "No, it's not okay." I said terrible things. I believe terrible things. And Michelle, God, Dad, she's devastated. The things she said in court, the things Mom coached her to say, she's sick over it. "We want to see you. We need to see you. Can we come there wherever you are?" "I'm at Grandpa's place, in Kentucky. We'll be there tomorrow." They came, both of them, with their spouses and my 4 grandchildren. We sat in that sparse little house, surrounded by the few possessions my father had kept, and I told them everything. I played them the recordings. I showed them the evidence he'd collected. I explained how their grandfather, a man they'd barely known, had spent the last years of his life protecting me, protecting all of us. Michelle cried through most of it. I never knew him. I barely remember him. We only saw him a few times, and he was always so distant. Why didn't he ever tell us? "Because that's who he was," I said. "He showed love by protecting, not by saying it. He kept his distance because he thought it would keep us safe. He was wrong about that, but his intentions were good." Derek, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "What are you going to do with this place?" I looked around the little house, at the walls my father had lived within for 40 years, at the window where he'd watched for threats, at the floor where he'd hidden his final act of love. "I'm going to keep it," I said. "I think I'll retire here. It's quiet, it's safe, and it's the closest I can get to understanding who my father really was." The trial for Patricia, Webb, and Morrison took 8 months. All 3 were convicted on multiple federal charges. Patricia got 12 years, Webb 15, Morrison 20. Her sister Rebecca, who'd been involved in recruiting Patricia into the scheme, got 7 years. My children visit regularly now. We've started having family gatherings here, at my father's place, the grandchildren running through the woods where my father once stood watch. I've fixed up the house, added a bedroom, updated the kitchen, but I kept his recliner in the same spot, facing the same window. Sometimes I sit there in the evenings and think about him. About all the years I thought he was just a hard, distant man who couldn't show affection. About all the ways he was silently protecting me while I went through life completely unaware. About how his last act was to document everything, to ensure that even from beyond the grave, he could still stand in front of the bullets. I found something else in his house, after the trial ended. In the attic, in a box of his old military gear, there was a letter he'd written but never sent. It was addressed to me, dated the year after my mother died. "Jim," it said, "I know I'm not a good father. I know I don't say the things a father should say. I know I don't hug you, don't tell you I love you, don't show up to your school events the way other fathers do. I want you to know it's not because I don't love you. It's because I love you so much that it terrifies me. Every time I get close to you, I see all the ways I could fail to protect you. Every time I start to open up, I remember what happened to your mother, and I shut down because I'm afraid if I'm not vigilant, if I'm not watching, they'll come for you next. Someday you'll understand that fathers carry weight their sons never see. We fight battles in the shadows so our children can walk in the light. I'm not asking you to forgive me for being distant. I'm just asking you to know that every moment of distance was an act of love. You're everything to me. You're everything I fought for. And I'll keep fighting until the day I die to make sure you have the life you deserve. Dad." I framed that letter. It hangs above the mantel now, where everyone can see it. My son Derek brought his kids out last weekend. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the Kentucky hills, when his youngest, my granddaughter Emma, who's 6, asked me, "Grandpa, was your dad a hero?" I thought about that. About Vietnam. About the decades of vigilance. about the evidence gathering, about the final recordings, about the weight fathers carry in silence. Yeah, sweetheart, I said. He was. He just didn't wear a cape. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that could have happened. Losing everything brought me here, to this quiet place, to finally understanding my father, to reconnecting with my children in a way I never could before. It gave me the chance to finish what he started, to fight the battles he couldn't finish, to honor the sacrifice he made. And if you're out there listening, if you're going through something that feels impossible, if you feel like you've lost everything and don't know how to go on, let me tell you what I learned. Sometimes the answers you need are hidden in places you never thought to look. Sometimes the people you thought didn't care were actually fighting battles you couldn't see. And sometimes the worst betrayal leads you exactly where you need to be, to find the truth that sets you free. My father taught me that. Not through words, not through affection, but through action, through sacrifice, through standing watch in the shadows so I could walk in the light. That's what warriors do. They protect, they sacrifice, they fight battles in silence. And sometimes, even years after they're gone, they still save you. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced betrayal or loss, or wondered about the sacrifices others made for you, share this. And remember, the strongest love isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the quietest acts that require the most courage.